Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Anthony. Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, I'm the executive director of the Future of Life Institute. I'm also a professor of physics at the University of California at Santa Cruz. So I've had a long interest in kind of the big picture questions, and AI is now one of the biggest picture questions that there is that we're facing as a society.
It is. And the Future of Life Institute led the open letter about 6 months ago or so by now that called for a pause on AI. And a lot of prominent business leaders, including Elon Musk and plenty of others, have signed that letter. So why do you think business leaders signed the letter? I mean, clearly AI is quite beneficial for productivity, for profits, for bottom lines. So why did they sign the letter? What is the concern that they should have about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, from what I hear, business leaders are people too, and they have their own sort of future in existence. And I think it's important to note that the targets of this letter are the very sort of cutting edge new giant AI experiments that are being run in a handful of companies. This is not a letter about, limiting AI in general, or that AI is bad or it's not useful and so on. There are lots of risks for the sorts of AI that we have now, but there are also lots of benefits from those. And one of the things that we're going to have to work out as a society are kind of how to get most of those benefits and avoid those risks. But there's a new level of risk when we go into these giant new AI systems that are going to have capabilities that we simply can't predict and don't know whether we're going to be able to control. And so I think the sort of huge response to the letter goes to the feeling that people, including business leaders, including policymakers, the general public, feel like we're on this kind of out of control freight train that's just rushing forward in AI capability without taking a moment to consider, are these systems safe? How are we going to keep them under control? How are we going to make sure that they're beneficial to us? How are we going to work them into our lives in a way that promotes well-being? And so I think there's that sense, and I think that was what was behind the response to the letter.
So business leaders, of course, are typically pro-technology. We've had a lot of technology whose consequences we don't know. And clearly, AI has already shown quite high productivity benefits. The generative AI, all of these ChatGPT and Claude and so on, and major companies are very invested into it. I mean, Amazon recently invested a lot of money into Anthropic, which runs Claude. And of course, earlier, Microsoft invested a lot of money into OpenAI. Google bought DeepMinds. These are probably the three most important labs creating the new versions of generative AI, which are quite potentially problematic. So we have these large investments, we have this large productivity. Why should business leaders think that this is something inherently different than other forms of technology whose future consequences we didn't know?
Yeah, I think it's always difficult to know where the technology is going to go in terms of its utility, sort of how it's going to advance. What's different about these new AI systems is that we literally don't know what they're going to be able to do, and we don't know how to do it, right? We're used to building technologies where we design the technology, we understand how it's supposed to work, we engineer it to do a certain thing, and then it does that thing, or it fails, and then we fix it. These AI systems, I mean, AI in general, is a technology, especially in its more modern sort of neural network incarnation, where we design the goal of the system, roughly speaking, and the system figures out how to achieve that goal. But now we don't even quite do that. We design a sort of proxy goal, like complete the sentence, put all of the human internet and all of the fruits of 100 billion transistor chips, tens of thousands of them for months. And we get this model that does translation and writes poetry and does code and all of these things from this simple metric of complete the sentence. So we don't even give them their goals anymore exactly. We sort of grow this digital system, and then we figure out that it can do all these potentially useful things and all these potentially risky things. And we sort of try to shake our finger at it and hit it with a stick when it does the things we don't want it to do, and we give it a little praise when it does the things we want it to do. So it's a very, very different sort of system from a normal piece of technology where we have a use in mind, we design the thing, it does exactly how it was designed, or else we fix it. These are more akin to bringing into, new biological beings that we have to like and like domesticate or something. And, if you think about bringing in some biological being into your house, you want it to be something what it's going to do, and you feel some. You don't want to bring some giant, scary, wild animal that you don't know what it's going to do into your house. And I think that's sort of what we're doing with these new AI systems. We don't want to, it's not that you can't make use of a giant, like powerful animal, but you don't just want to bring it into your house willy-nilly without knowing what it's going to do, or can you predict it, or can you control it?
So let's think about what might happen. So Google is probably going to come out with Gemini soon, and there's going to be a ChatGPT 5 or 4.5 or 5. Let's say there's a ChatGPT 6 version, and the company, and it does a lot more advanced stuff, but it's still the same idea, complete sentence. So let's say a company takes that and says, hey, ChatGPT 6, the enterprise version for our company, why don't we give you the goal of just raising our bottom line? What would be some potential problems that a company can find itself can result in if it gives it that very clear goal, which is the goal of companies, business leaders?
Yeah, so first, I think it's important to note that we don't know what ChatGPT 5 or 6 or anything else is going to be able to do. I mean, if you look at 10 times as much training or 10 times as many neurons in a biological system, that's a very big different system. That's a difference between a 3-year-old and a 30-year-old, or between a bear and a person. So we really don't know like how advanced this next generation. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that it's just better. It's very similar system, just like better at what it does.
Yeah.
Now, suppose I'm a business, I give it the goal of making my bottom line better, making more profit, making my products better, and so on. So what's it going to do? It's going to start giving me lots of good advice, and I'll start taking that advice. And if the system is effective, if it's really good, that advice will pay off, and I'll take more advice. I'll delegate more decisions to that AI system. So pretty soon, the AI system is going to be making a lot of my business decisions, and it's great, feels good. It's making me a lot of money.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my competitors are also using the same AI system, or maybe their own, to do their business decisions. If I'm a business that decides to make human decisions and not use the AI, I may find myself, at a competitive disadvantage, because all my competitors, maybe they're making better decisions. Maybe it's just faster. Maybe I just feel like I have to use AI, but I'm going to feel like I have to use AI too. So pretty soon we have a whole bunch of businesses whose decisions are being made by AI systems, maybe even the same one, that's all run by OpenAI or all run by Google or whatever, just, helping all these different businesses compete with each other. Now GPT-7 comes along, more decisions get put onto the AI system. At some point, we have to ask who's actually running these businesses, who's actually competing with who. It's going to look like AI systems running the businesses and AI systems competing with each other, even though they all work for the same company. So I think that's where we're most likely headed. I think that is a risky future for humanity if the biggest decisions made by some of the most powerful entities on the planet, our businesses, are basically all being made by AI systems that we don't understand, and we may control them in the sense that we can tell them, we give them the goal, we tell them what to do in that sense, if they're like ChatGPT, but we're not going to be in charge if all we're doing is following their instructions. And so that's the kind of risk that I see for society as we go down this road. Now, for an individual business, I think the risk you have is of the AI not doing, giving bad advice and not doing really what it's supposed to, not really understanding the nuance of the world that it's in. All of the things that humans are still better at, it's going to be mixed up in the things that the AI is not good at. Currently they still hallucinate a lot. They confidently assert things that are not true. They do all of these things. Presumably those will get better. But I think unless we have a sort of pretty significant upgrade in architecture, those sort of weaknesses are still going to be there because they're not understanding the world in the same way that humans are. I think those might be remediable, but we were talking about extrapolating today's systems.
Yeah, which is one reasonable. I mean, certainly something can be different, but thinking about extrapolating today's systems, well, the open letter, there are certainly concerns about AI not simply running everything, but having some existential risks, meaning something that might actually cause the destruction of humanity. How do you go from that AI making decisions, that ChatGPT 7, whatever version, making decisions, to actually existential risks for humanity?
Yeah, well, I think existential risk is a slightly tricky word because people mean different things by it. I think there are a few different things people sometimes mean. One is really catastrophic risk, like large-scale catastrophe or, excuse me, danger to humanity. There, I think the primary danger is really sort of bad actors that leverage the power of these systems to do things that they wouldn't have been able to do before. So I think empowering huge numbers of people really is great in general, but there are downsides to empowering everybody if some of the things that you empower them to do are destructive, because it's generally much easier to destroy things than to build them. So if you empower everybody to destroy or to build, you're going to get a lot of destruction, unfortunately. So I think that's one danger where we've seen that AI systems already have the capability to build new poisons, design new poisons. We heard from the CEO of Anthropic that in a couple of years, AI systems may well be able to sort of engineer new bioweapons or new pathogens if they're not properly controlled. So there are a lot of things that are very scary for the world that up until now has taken human experts to do, and it's not so easy. Human experts are not so easy to get to do, in groups, high paid, like terribly immoral and destructive things. Unfortunately, it happens, but it's not so easy to do. Whereas if you just have to tell your AI, please build me a chemical weapon, and it just does, then that's going to be pretty easy. So I think that's one class of risks.
Okay.
A second one is really the extinction risk. And I think that falls into two categories. One is sort of what we talked about before, that as these systems get more and more powerful, we just delegate more and more control and more decisions to them. At some point down the road, we find that basically humanity just doesn't have much control at all over what the world is doing. It already feels like that now sometimes, doesn't it? Do we really control our economy? Do we really control our political system? And yet there's no AI around. But imagine now that all of those things are being mediated by these giant systems that we don't really understand how they work, really understand fundamentally what's going on inside them, really don't understand their goals, and it's all happening at way faster than human speed. I think we're going to feel like we don't really have control of the world, and indeed we won't. And so that, I think, once we lose control of the world to this sort of amalgamation of AI systems, that could go fine, or it could go existentially bad. It won't be up to us. That's just going to be up to the AI systems, and we're going to have to hope that we're compatible with the goals that they end up having. So that's the second one. A third is the more classic accident, that the people who are doing these giant AI experiments find that they kind of overreach, that the system that they develop is just much more capable than they thought it was going to be, that they don't really know how to control that system, that the system starts proliferating, outside of the lab, or it starts self-improving in a way that they don't understand, that it's deceiving them. These they feel like science fiction-y things, but that's, we're living in a science fiction world at this point, the level of AI systems that we have. So I think it's more of the rogue AI scenario where the AI has its own aims or a good aim that is incompatible with our existence, and we're unable to stop it, even though we know that it's doing things that we don't like. So I think to me, that's one of the smaller probabilities, but I think it's not out of the realm of possibility, and that's something that we have to be very careful of, because that's our extinction. And then the fourth, I think, is existential in kind of the existential literature sense, like what's it all about? right? And I think AI really is a risk in that sense. Like if you ask, what is the purpose of human life? Like, what are we here for? The things that give our life meaning, a lot of them, if we just turn those over to AI systems, I think that's a huge risk to our humanity. If all our culture is not coming out of humans, but out of generative AI models, if our decisions are coming out of AI systems, if our social structures are designed by AI and we just sort of like play along, where is our humanity? So I think that is actually a risk that is one of the more high probability ones, along with the sort of delegation of control away from us. So those are the ways that I think of existential risk.
Okay, that's very helpful. I haven't thought about that last one. That's really interesting. Now, when I think about the risks number 2 and 3, kind of the rogue AI or AI lack of control, that seems to me like it happens in a scenario where there's no central agent or agents that can slow down or control AI. So I think of it as a difference between, let's say, AI being developed by Microsoft and OpenAI, or Google and DeepMind, or Amazon Anthropic, kind of closed private systems, versus, let's say, what Meta is doing and releasing open source models, where open source models are much harder to control because there's no, OpenAI can't go and shut down the open source model, and Meta can't shut down its open source model. So do you see a bigger threat than from the open source movement? What are your thoughts on specifically where the kind of threat for the delegation of control without being able to turn it off, or the rogue AI without it being able to turn it off? Where is it coming from?
Yeah, I think, open source is a tricky term with AI models, because it's not actually the source code that is really the interesting thing. It's the weights in the AI model. If the source code is kind of interesting if you happen to have 10,000 high-powered GPUs at your disposal, but otherwise it's the weights. And what's problematic about open sourcing AI models, especially ones that have been that have had guardrails put on them so that they don't do some of the more dangerous things, is that once they're open source, you can simply take those guardrails off and do all of those dangerous things if you choose to. So sort of open source software in the pre-AI era, like open source cryptography software, for example, it just gets better if you open source it. Everybody takes a look at it, they see it's got, it's got this weakness. The company that made it or the person that made it fixes that weakness. Nobody wants to use the old one, because who wants worse cryptography? You always want better cryptography. And so there's a sense in which open sourcing that improves the software and makes it better, and safer, right? Bad cryptography is unsafe cryptography. With open source AI models, they also tend toward doing what people want them to do, in the sense that they remove all the safety restrictions. But there you're then back to the question of, by empowering all these people with a model that will do anything they want, what is the sort of risk versus safety balance in doing so? And that's a difficult question. I'm a big believer in sort of empowering lots of people. I don't like the idea of giant companies having all the power in themselves. I like the idea of sort of it more spread out. But at the same time, there are things that are too risky to open source. We don't tell everybody exactly how to make nuclear weapons or bioweapons or the worst sorts of chemical agents. And I think this is going to be a problem that we really have to face. What I don't think we can do is pretend that we can have both safety, and mitigating the risk, and open source. I just think those are sort of compatible with each other. We have to bite the bullet and say, we're going to proliferate this risk, or we have to say, we're not going to open source things. I'm not sure we get to have it both ways, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what it seems to me, that's kind of a pretty risky scenario. Well, so business leaders, one thing they can clearly do is not support the open source movement if they don't want that to happen. What else can they actually do practically and pragmatically if they want to address the kind of risks that you're raising, which are serious risks?
Yeah, I think staying involved is one thing, you know, in the sense that we had a lot of support from business leaders with the original open letter. I think these are people that carry a lot of weight in society, both, you know, economic weight and reputational weight and networks and so on. So their opinion matters. And I think making that opinion clear that we have to, you know, care about the safety of these systems is important. I think also the idea that that making these AI systems safer means that they're going to be sort of less profitable, or that they're going to be that it's sort of anti-innovation, I think is quite problematic in the sense that I think, you know, it's hard to innovate in products that are like inherently dangerous or unsafe. This is just not a great business model. So I think AI is going to get regulated one way or another and in various different levels. I think, you know, regulation is coming in the EU for some ways. I think legislation is probably going to come eventually in the US, though it may be slower, because you know, there are too many risks. There are going to be accidents. There are going to be negative consequences, and there's going to be calls for regulation. So I think the question is whether that regulation is going to be sort of well done or poorly done. And I would, insofar as AI companies or industry in general is engaged in the sort of policy space and the regulatory space, I would just urge them to sort of consider not just the sort of niche issue that they might have in their own favor. You know, we all know what happens behind closed doors in regulation making and in lawmaking in various jurisdictions. And I think we all really sort of, you know, it's a little bit idealistic, but I would hope that even lobbyists are people too. Not business leaders, but lobbyists are people too. We all are, and to keep in mind that this is a real danger, and that we have to like figure out how, as a, you know, not just as a sort of society or a country, but even as a species, we're going to have to worry about how to mitigate this risk to everybody. And so just a little bit of sort of putting aside private vested interest and keeping the interest of humanity at the forefront would be great. This is something that's sort of easy for me to do because I work for an organization that just has humanity's interest as its goal. This is a lot harder to do. I understand when you're in a business and you've got a particular, you know, business interest that you have to uphold. So it's easy for me to say, but it also is, I think, just very important. We're all people.
That's a wonderful message to end with. If people want to learn more about what the Future of Life Institute is doing on AI, where should they go?
Our website is really the best place. It's got lots of resources and what we're up to.
Excellent.
That's futureoflife.org.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anthony. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to chat.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show, and it helps us improve the show. All right, everyone. I'll see you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. And in the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.